Hello and welcome to Unacademy, a one stop destination for the English medium civil services aspirants. A very good morning and welcome to the daily Hindu news analysis. So, let's begin today's discussion by first looking at the topics that we are going to discuss. From the Delhi edition of the Hindu, I have chosen 9 important articles for a detailed analysis so that you don't have to go back and read the newspaper again. But before we start, I have a couple of important announcements. Unacademy is providing a 25% off on all our IAS courses. I'm told that this is a limited period offer and the offer ends tonight. So if you want to avail our subscription, please click on the link provided in the description box below and enter the code IAS English. Especially those of you who are preparing for Prelims 2027, you have a perfect opportunity right now. You have a window of 18 months to go for the exam. So you can avail a 18-month subscription at the discounted price of 25,499. So those interested, please click on the link in the description and enter the code IAS English. And if you want the PDF of the session, please scan the QR code on your screen and join our official Telegram channel, because after the session ends, we will be uploading the PDF over here. So with this, let's get started and look at the first article. On page number 15, the Hindu has published an article that focuses on the establishment of a tiger reserve in the state of Goa. Recently, a central empowered committee that was established by the Supreme Court of India has submitted a report to the Supreme Court, and it has recommended that Goa should establish a tiger reserve by merging the existing wildlife sanctuaries and national parks. So, this has implications for tiger conservation in the country. It has implications for protecting the tiger habitat and the tiger corridors along the Western Ghats from Karnataka to Goa to Maharashtra. So within Goa, there is some opposition against establishing the tiger reserve. Goa itself has taken a stand against the decision to establish a tiger reserve, but the Supreme Court and the Central Empowered Committee have been pushing Goa to establish a tiger reserve. This is based on one of the recommendations of the National Tiger Conservation Authority that was provided a few years ago. The NTCA was of the opinion that establishing a tiger reserve in Goa is crucial to connect the tiger corridors that link Karnataka, Goa, and Maharashtra in the vital Western Ghats region. So let's dive a little deep into this topic and understand as to which protected areas in Goa are considered for establishment of this tiger reserve. Let's discuss why Goa is opposed to establishing the tiger reserve. What has been Goa's position in front of the court and in other instances with regard to having a resident tiger population in the state? And if the tiger reserve is established, what would be the environmental impact? So let's take a look at this in slight detail. Now, please look at the map here. The map is depicting the Western Ghats belt, the Sahyadri ranges stretching from Karnataka towards Goa to Maharashtra. Now, in Karnataka, there are some important tiger reserves and protected areas, such as the Anshi Dandeli Tiger Reserve, also known as the Kali Tiger Reserve, located over here along the borders with Goa. Right next to it, we have the Bhimgad Wildlife Sanctuary. Now, these are major tiger habitats in Karnataka. Karnataka has a healthy tiger population in the Dandeli Anshi region, which is part of the Kali Tiger Reserve. Now, if you look at Maharashtra over here, we have the Sahyadri Tiger Reserve. The Sahyadri Tiger Reserve, which is also a major tiger habitat in the state of Maharashtra. Now, from the Sahyadri Tiger Reserve to Kali Tiger Reserve in Karnataka, there is a tiger corridor that exists over here that passes through some of the protected areas in Goa. In Goa, we have wildlife sanctuaries and national parks, such as the Mahadai Wildlife Sanctuary. We also have Bhagwan Mahavir National Park and Wildlife Sanctuary. the Netravali Wildlife Sanctuary located over here. And next to it, you have the Kotigao Wildlife Sanctuary. Now, all these protected areas in Goa, they do have a protected status. Some conservation measures are implemented here. Human activities are restricted to some extent. But however, Goa has been against the establishment of a tiger reserve in this region for certain specific reasons. Now, if you look at the reason why Goa is opposing it, the main concern is about the displacement of population. So, it's a social and economic concern which has led Goa to oppose the establishment of a tiger reserve in the state. See, Goa has argued that up to 1 lakh people may have to be relocated and displaced if this tiger reserve has to be established. Now, you need to understand, why does the establishment of a tiger reserve result in displacement of the local population? Why should the villages be rehabilitated? What is the need to evict the population from a tiger reserve? See, in a tiger reserve, there is a model of conservation which is implemented known as the core buffer strategy. In the core buffer strategy of conservation, there is a core habitat which is identified where human activities are almost completely prohibited. This area is considered as inviolate, meaning this region, the core habitat, cannot be violated by any human presence or human activity unless and until some activities are explicitly permitted. So, this is the core area for conservation. Around that, you have a buffer zone where limited activities are permitted. So, in the core area, even if there are tribal communities, forest dwelling tribes, and indigenous communities present, they will be incentivized by the government to leave this region, and they will be resettled. They will be accommodated in the buffer zone or in the areas around it. See, government can't force the people to evict from their villages. Forced eviction is not legally allowed. But through incentives, through right compensation, by holding a dialogue with the local community, by convincing them, by winning over their approval, and by compensating them, by helping them relocate, by building houses for them in the buffer zone or in the outer areas. Through such strategies, the government can clear the human population from the core habitat to provide for better environment conservation. So, this is the model of conservation that you see in tiger reserves. Now, if you look at other protected areas, such as a wildlife sanctuary or a national park, which are recognized under the Wildlife Protection Act, these protected areas, they do have a certain degree of protection where human activities are restricted and regulated, but they do not call for relocation of the human population. There is no need to relocate the human habitations. The indigenous communities and the forest dwelling tribes can continue to reside in the protected areas, but of course, some of their activities will be restricted in order to safeguard the forest, the ecosystems, and the biodiversity. But once a tiger reserve is established, it gets an elevated status, it gets more protection. The core buffer model of conservation will be implemented, where the core habitat would be treated as inviolate, meaning human presence should be cleared, human activity should be banned and restricted, unless and until it is explicitly approved. And any settlements here will have to be pushed out through incentives, through consultation, through compensation. And these villages will have to be relocated to the buffer zone or the outer areas. So, when tiger reserves or even biosphere reserves are set up, when the core buffer model of conservation is implemented, this requires the relocation of the villages present within the core habitat. So, this is where a social and economic concern will arise. So, Goa was arguing that establishing a tiger reserve by merging these wildlife sanctuaries and national parks will have a serious socio-economic impact. Goa's argument was up to 1 lakh people may have to be displaced. But latest findings by the Central Empowered Committee has shown that Goa was actually exaggerating the claims. See, in the identified areas, which is an important tiger corridor, around 33 to 35 villages are present, and hardly around 1,200 plus households have been identified. And the total population which may have to be shifted out of the core area would be just 5,000 to 6,000 people. Now, this is quite manageable. If the relocation involved more than 1 lakh people, then it would have been a significant social impact and economic impact on the region. But given that the region is inhabited hardly by 5 to 6,000 people, it is seemed it is deemed to be convenient, or at least it is seen as possible to ensure the consultation with the local community and incentivize them to shift out of the areas so that a tiger reserve can be established. Now, this is where Goa has been contradicting itself. See, in this particular case, related to establishment of a tiger reserve, Goa has been arguing in front of Bombay High Court, then in front of the Supreme Court, that it does not have a permanent tiger population. Goa's argument is that the state is only a transient habitat, meaning it's a temporary habitat for tigers that are moving from Karnataka to Maharashtra and vice versa. This has been Goa's argument since 2018. In fact, in 2023, first it was the Bombay High Court which ordered Goa to merge the Mahadai Wildlife Sanctuary and all the other protected areas around it to establish this tiger reserve. So since then, Goa has been arguing that it has no permanent tiger population, so there is no need for a tiger reserve. Goa has argued that it is just a transient habitat where tigers are moving from Karnataka to Maharashtra, Maharashtra to Karnataka. So we don't have any permanent tiger population. So when the Bombay High Court gave this judgment, Goa appealed against it. It filed a special leave petition at the Supreme Court. And since then, it has been opposing the establishment of the tiger reserve on the basis of the same argument that Goa doesn't have a permanent tiger population and establishment of a tiger reserve would result in displacement of more than 1 lakh people. Now, these claims are proven to be untrue. The study by the Central Empowered Committee under the monitoring of the Supreme Court has identified that the displacement would involve maximum 5 to 6,000 people. So the human cost is minimized, the social economic cost is minimized. And Goa, as I said, is contradicting itself because since 2018, Goa is also arguing in a different matter that it has a permanent tiger population. This is in the context of the Mahadai River dispute, which is an interstate water sharing dispute between Goa, Karnataka, and Maharashtra. Karnataka, which has planned major irrigation projects on the Mahadai Basin, including the Kalsa Banduri Canal project. Goa is strongly opposed to these projects in Karnataka. Karnataka says it is essential for providing drinking water for hydropower generation and other purposes. But Goa is opposing these projects and claiming a higher share from the Mahadai River Basin. So, with regard to Mahadai River dispute, Goa has argued that if Karnataka were to block the flow of water or divert the flow of water, it will affect the permanent tiger population in Goa. So, this is the contradiction which is coming out. So, with regard to Mahadai River dispute, Goa says we have a permanent tiger population. It will get affected if water flow is affected. But in the matter of establishing a tiger reserve, which was first ordered with the Bombay High Court in 2023, and now by the Central Empowered Committee of the Supreme Court, Goa is arguing that we don't have a permanent tiger population. We only have a transient tiger population. So this contradiction of Goa has essentially caused quite an embarrassment for the state government. But now the Supreme Court is very clear that Goa should follow the orders of the National Tiger Conservation Authority. The NTCA is the nodal authority for implementing Project Tiger. It is the National Tiger Conservation Authority, which is the nodal authority for implementing Project Tiger for managing tiger reserves in coordination with the state governments and the state forest departments. So NTCA is very, very clear that the tiger corridor in Goa should be protected. The tiger census has shown the presence of at least 35 tigers in Goa, which are considered to be permanent residents of Goa. And yes, it is a migratory corridor. Tigers from the Kali Tiger Reserve in Karnataka move towards the Sahyadri Tiger Reserve in Maharashtra and they come back as well. So protecting this key habitat is essential. So that is the reason why the Central Empowered Committee has come out with a plan. It has come out with a solution that Goa can implement. Instead of establishing a tiger reserve and evicting the people immediately, the Central Empowered Committee has recommended a phased implementation. So now the Supreme Court has given a 3-month timeline within which Goa should notify the establishment of a tiger reserve in accordance with the norms of NTCA. And once the tiger reserve is notified by merging all these wildlife sanctuaries and national parks, then the shifting of the population can be done slowly in two different phases. Maybe Goa can first start with the least populated areas and areas with high tiger density. So this can be the first priority. Instead of evicting all the 5 to 6,000 people in one go, which can cause a lot of disruption, it can have an economic impact as well. Instead of doing that, in phase one, Goa is expected from the Supreme Court and the Central Empowered Committee to carry out an incremental eviction, not through force, but through consultation, through compensation, through incentives. So it can first focus on the least populated villages and the core areas where tiger density is higher. And then it can implement the second phase, covering all the remaining areas, which will fulfill the establishment of the core habitat in this new tiger reserve, which is likely to be established very soon. So, this topic is a great lesson. It's a case study for you to understand the dynamics between environment conservation and the need for socio-economic growth. Because quite often they are contradictory to each other, they are inversely proportional. Whenever you try to focus on socio-economic aspects, on welfare, on livelihood of the people, this might run counter to the conservation objectives because this comes at the cost of environment destruction. Whereas if you obsessively focus only on environment conservation, it might hamper your socio-economic growth. So these are conflicting objectives, and you need to find a balanced approach, a sustainable way of managing these two conflicting objectives. So it's a great example, a great case study to understand this conflict. So please take up this practice question. Use the points that we have discussed. You can even draw the rough map that I showed you to explain why a tiger reserve in Goa is very critical and try to write a good answer for this question. Please use this for your answer writing practice. Now let's move to the next topic. On page 16, there's an article that explains the complex history of the Durand Line. It helps us understand the current geopolitical tensions present across the Durand Line. And the answers lie in the history of the Durand Line. I'm sure all of you are aware that recently Afghanistan, Pakistan have been involved in military clashes. It's an ongoing conflict, by the way. For more than 1 month, Pakistan has been conducting major military operations across the Durand Line aimed at Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan, the Pakistan Taliban or the TTP, which allegedly is sheltered in Afghanistan. Pakistan has even conducted airstrikes and cross border raids, and it has even killed a number of civilians along the Durand Line. On the other side, Afghan Taliban, which is the interim regime in Afghanistan, it has accused Pakistan of violating its sovereignty and it has retaliated against these Pakistani strikes, resulting in significant losses for the Pakistani army as well. So, frequent incursions, clashes, cross border strikes are taking place. Just a couple of days ago, as well, in the last week, there have been multiple cross border strikes from both the sides, from Pakistani army and air force, and as well as from Afghan Taliban. So, tensions have been spiking. Though a ceasefire was mediated a few weeks ago by Qatar. Qatar acted as a mediator and it brought Afghan Taliban to the negotiating table along with the Pakistani military establishment, and it has worked out a ceasefire. But despite the ceasefire worked out by Qatar, the clashes are continuing and tensions are rising between the two countries. So, whatever you're seeing between Afghanistan and Pakistan today, it's all related to the complex history of the Durand Line. So, we need to learn what is the Durand Line? Why was it drawn? When was it created? What's the controversy surrounding it? The Durand Line, the creation of it, goes back to 1893. There's a very interesting story behind this. I want all of you to pay attention for the next few minutes as we will cover this topic in great detail. Now, on the map here, you can see the Durand Line, which marks the current border between Afghanistan and Pakistan. It stretches nearly 2,600 kilometers in length, stretching from the Iranian border to the Karakoram and the Wakhan corridor, where Afghanistan touches the Xinjiang province of China. So, this 2,600-kilometer boundary that divides Afghanistan Pakistan has been a bone of contention since 1947. Afghanistan has not accepted the Durand Line as the international border. It rejects the Durand Line as the boundary because it divides the Pashtun community, the Pashtun ethnic group, which is the most dominant ethnic group in parts of Afghanistan, in southern and eastern parts of Afghanistan. They are found across the border in Pakistan as well, in parts of Balochistan and Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, and in the tribal areas of Waziristan. The Pashtun community is found in large numbers. So they feel that the Durand Line has divided the community. And since many decades they have opposed the Durand Line, they do not recognize the validity of this international border. Even today, the Afghan Taliban, which is the interim regime, rejects the Durand Line as the boundary between Afghanistan and Pakistan. So this is at the very source or the root of this dispute and conflict. Now, when you look at the history of this, it goes back to the British attempts to try and control Afghanistan, to try and even occupy Afghanistan. Though the Durand Line, its origin goes back to 1893, there's a much deeper history behind it. In 1839, the British made their first attempt to capture Afghanistan, and this resulted in the first Anglo Afghan War, as it is called today. Now, the reason why the British were interested in Afghanistan is because British India perceived a major threat from Russian influence and Russian advances in the Central Asia region. See, please understand, for the British, India was their prized colony. India was the one which powered their industrial revolution, their growth, their rise as a global superpower. So British intelligence believed in 1800s, in early to mid 1800s, that an expansionist Russia could possibly pose a threat to its colony in India. Russian presence and influence was expanding in Central Asia and stretching towards the Himalayas, the Karakoram, the Hindu Kush, towards Afghanistan. So for British India, it was essential to counter the Russian influence. And they saw Afghanistan as a security buffer. Just like how the British cultivated the Himalayan kingdoms as a security buffer, like Tibet, Nepal, Sikkim, Bhutan, all these Himalayan kingdoms were cultivated as buffer states by the British to hold off any possible Russian invasion from the north. So, through a similar strategy, they saw Afghanistan as a frontier, which could be a security buffer to hold off any Russian advances into the region to protect their prized asset, which was the British India colony. So, in 1839, the first Anglo Afghan War broke out, and the British were eventually pushed out in this conflict. Because, see, Pashtuns are a war hardened ethnic tribal community. The Pashtuns are known for their aggression, uh, their focus on their land, their rights, their ethnicity, their identity. right? They have always resisted any sort of outside interference to control them. And they are known to be a fierce fighting community. The Pashtuns managed to push back the British during the First Anglo-Afghan War. So this was a big setback for the British Empire, the British Indian Empire. Then in 1878, Britain made a second attempt. The Second Anglo-Afghan War broke out. In the Second Anglo-Afghan War, the British managed to gain an upper hand over the then Emir of Afghanistan. They managed to defeat the then Emir of Afghanistan. The British clearly gained the upper hand in this conflict. And in 1879, they signed the Treaty of Gandamak. The Treaty of Gandamak. Please make a note, this is very important. Now, through the Treaty of Gandamak, Britain essentially gained control over the foreign policy of Afghanistan. The Emir agreed to outsource Afghan foreign policy to the British so that the British could control the foreign policy of the Emirate of Afghanistan and they could ward off any Russian influence and Russian attempts. But in return, the Emir of Afghanistan will retain his independence and autonomy, and Britain would withdraw its troops, and British would promise that they would not interfere in the internal affairs of the Emirate of Afghanistan. This was the deal that was struck. I'll repeat my point. In the Second Anglo-Afghan War of 1878, the British gained a clear upper hand, managing to defeat the Emir of Afghanistan. They signed the Treaty of Gandamak. In the Treaty of Gandamak, Britain gained control over Afghanistan's foreign policy. Britain would dictate the foreign relations of the Emirate of Afghanistan. So, in return for this, Afghanistan would get its autonomy, its assumed or presumed independence. The Emir would control the authority, the administration, and Britain promised to withdraw all the troops, pull back all the troops, and not to interfere in the internal affairs of the Emirate of Afghanistan. So, this was the arrangement that was worked out between the Emirate of Afghanistan and British India. Then, in 1893, when Afghanistan was under British foreign policy control, the then Foreign Secretary of the British Government of India, Sir Henry Durand, he would propose the boundary line to be delineated between Afghanistan and British India. So the Emir had no other choice but to accept the drawing of this boundary, and following a joint survey by the British and the Emirate of Afghanistan, led by Sir Henry Durand, this boundary line was fixed. Hence the name Durand Line. It's named after the then British Foreign Secretary. So the Durand Line basically divided the Pashtun land. The traditional Pashtun land was divided into two. Half of it fell into British India, which is today's Pakistan, and the other half remained with the Emirate of Afghanistan. Then Balochistan, which was also home to some population of the Pashtuns, was brought under British India as a collection of princely states. So this was not to the liking of the Pashtuns, because the Pashtuns felt that, first of all, their traditional land was being divided by this Durand Line. They were losing Balochistan as well to British India, and it was drawing a clear demarcation stretching from Iran to China and keeping the Wakhan corridor as a buffer against Russia. The strategic Wakhan corridor, which you can see here, this narrow land corridor of Afghanistan that's supposed to link Afghanistan with India, with Gilgit Baltistan here. This narrow land corridor would act as a security buffer for British India to ward off any Russian invasion from this region. So, this was the British strategy to create a security buffer across British India, stretching from Iran to China, to keep away the Russians. And this was not to the liking of the Pashtuns. They resisted the division of their native land. They were opposed to giving away Balochistan to British India. So they did not benefit from this line that was drawn. And since then, the Pashtuns have been opposed to the Durand Line as the boundary. But they had to accept this. Why? Because they were under an obligation under the Treaty of Gandamak. Britain controlled their foreign policy. And in return for that, Britain had withdrawn the troops and had granted some autonomy, promising not to interfere in Afghanistan. So if they don't accept this, then most likely Britain would have gone to war. Britain would have invaded the country again, placing troops, interfering in the internal matters. So hence, the then emir, who was quite closer to the British as well, accepted the Durand Line, though it was rejected by the Pashtuns. In 1901, the emir passed away. The emir passed away in 1901. Then his successor, Habibullah, was assassinated in 1990. By the end of the World War, the successor emir of Afghanistan was assassinated. So Habibullah was succeeded by Amanullah, who was treating the British as a rival, as a threat. Amanullah belonged to the new generation of Pashtuns who had come to dislike the British, who hated the British. They hated any sort of outside interference and control. So Amanullah managed to rally the Pashtun forces behind him, the warlords and the ethnic tribal leaders. They rallied behind Amanullah and they fought the Third Anglo Afghan War. This was a war against British interference, against British control in Afghanistan. This proved the might of the Pashtuns. See, today you might hear a term that Afghanistan is referred to as the graveyard of empires, because many empires have tried to occupy Afghanistan, control Afghanistan, but they've all been delivered a crushing defeat by the native Pashtuns, be it the Soviet Union, be it the United States. The first empire to be crushed in Afghanistan was Britain. They decisively lost the Third Anglo Afghan War. And the war ended with the Treaty of Rawalpindi. The Treaty of Rawalpindi brought the Anglo Afghan wars to an end. The British finally retreated because Britain had been slightly weakened following the World War I. And Amanullah's Pashtun forces, they had been much more superior, well organized, and they had used the local topography and the terrain to their advantage to deliver a crushing defeat to the British forces. Plus, Britain was dealing with multiple independence and decolonization movements around the world, especially in British India. So the British retreated. It was a strategic retreat for them. They took a back step. And Amanullah's forces won this war. And now they dictated terms to the British under the Treaty of Rawalpindi. So they made it clear that Durand Line will not be accepted as the border. The Durand Line will not be accepted as a border between British India and Afghanistan. But then you know what happened. 1947, Britain grants independence to India, partitions the Indian subcontinent into India and Pakistan, and hence the Durand Line now comes under Pakistan. So it becomes the border between Pakistan and Afghanistan, and the British left with this. So since then, native Pashtuns oppose the Durand Line as the international boundary. They don't accept it at all. That is where a problem lies for Pakistan. So in Afghanistan, if you look at the map again, there are major provinces located along the Durand Line. The Khost province, Patakia province. These are major provinces located, which is a Pashtun heartland. And on the other side, in Pakistan, you have Balochistan, Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, and the Waziristan tribal areas. So the Pashtuns present here, they jointly oppose Pakistani rule. They oppose the border itself. They want the border to be shifted. In fact, prior to 1947, Pashtuns wanted an independent sovereign nation for themselves, which they were calling it as Pashtunistan. They wanted a separate independent nation by erasing the Durand Line, and they wanted to unite all the Pashtun areas. But this was never realized. So as a result, post 1947, you see the rejection of Durand Line by successive Afghan governments, be it the pro-Soviet, pro-communist governments that were there, or be it the interim governments that came up in the 1990s, or even be it the Taliban regime, they've all rejected the Durand Line as the boundary. And that explains why the conflict persists over here. So there are close links between Afghan Taliban and the TTP. They are like brother organizations with a common ideology, but with different objectives. Afghan Taliban wanted to capture power in Afghanistan to form an emirate, to form an Islamic state, whereas the TTP, Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, the Pak Taliban, they have a similar ideology. Their objective is to overthrow the Pakistani state and capture power to form an emirate, an Islamic emirate in Pakistan. So there is a direct connection between the two, ideological connection. There is some element of support in the form of weapons, in the form of a safe haven, a sanctuary that Afghan Taliban has provided to Pak Taliban. So the TTP, over the last 2 decades, has been mounting major attacks against Pakistan. And this is where the problem lies for Pakistan. See, I was going through some reports recently. There was something which caught my attention. Pakistan's head of ISPR, which is the PR agency of the Pakistani military, the Inter Services Public Relations, the DG of ISPR has made a very interesting statement. He has said that Afghan Taliban is breaking the ceasefire mediated by Qatar. They are deliberately opening fire to create cover, to provide cover for TTP militants who are infiltrating across the border into Pakistan. Now, why did this catch my attention? This is exactly what Pakistan does with India across the line of control in Jammu and Kashmir. Pakistan breaks the ceasefire with India. Pakistani army and its border guarding forces and the Pak Rangers, they deliberately open fire against Indian positions during the night time to provide a cover so that Pakistani terrorists can sneak into India across the LOC to carry out attacks against India. This has been India's biggest complaint against Pakistan, that you're aiding and abetting cross border terrorism. You're aiding infiltration into our country. Now, look at how tables have turned. Pakistan is making the same complaint against Afghan Taliban, that you're breaking the ceasefire, opening fire to provide a cover to enable the infiltration of TTP militants who are carrying out attacks against Pakistani state. So that's why understanding the complex history of the Durand Line can be very, very important. It helps you understand the current geopolitics, the current tensions. So please take up this practice question for your answer writing practice. Now, moving on, there's another interesting article today. The government is planning to revive the Shipping Corporation of India, the SCI. Recently, at the India Maritime Week, the government has announced its plan to carry out a major overhaul and revive this mini Ratna, a public sector unit, which has been critical for India's shipping industry and for India's EXIM trade or export import trade. See, there was a time when the Shipping Corporation of India, it was going through a glorious period. There was a time when the Shipping Corporation of India owned 120 ships. Most of them were large container ships, merchant ships, and even tanker fleets that could carry oil. At one point, this was one of the highest shipping fleet in the world, owned by a government shipping company. 120 ships were owned by the shipping corporation, and it even had exclusive rights over meeting the oil requirements of the country. Under the cabotage rules, the government had provided exclusive rights to Shipping Corporation of India as a public sector entity to take care of the oil requirements of India. This was done to limit foreign participation in a strategic sector. Cabotage rules applies in the world of shipping, where countries they prioritize national companies owned by the government to ship critical products like oil and other key resources. They don't want much of foreign participation because they fear some interference and that could disrupt the supply of key resources. So, under the cabotage rules, India had favored the Shipping Corporation of India, which is a government entity, and it had a priority access to oil shipping into India. The SCI owned 120 plus ships, which was one of the largest fleets at one point in the entire world, owned by a national shipping company. It had performed a great role even during times of conflict, even during times of crisis, to secure the oil requirements of India and carry out the export and import of India. During Iran-Iraq war, Shipping Corporation of India would paint the name of India on the shipping vessels to make it clear that it's a friendly vessel, to ensure that neither Iran nor Iraq target our ships. During the Suez crisis, the oil crisis of 1970s, Shipping Corporation of India would deliver the requirements for the country because it was not a profit-minded company. It would place national interests and national priorities above the profit motive. As a government-run organization, its national interests and national priorities were of greater importance than making a profit. So, Shipping Corporation of India had done a phenomenal job until 1991, 1992 to meet the requirements, the shipping requirements of the country. It had actually enabled a local indigenous shipbuilding industry. See, it did procure some foreign vessels. For example, from Korea, Shipping Corporation of India had procured several ships that were named after India's Paramveer Chakra awardees. It was named after India's saints like Kabir, Ramdas, and others as a tribute to these great Indian individuals. It would even procure the latest engines, the latest shipbuilding material and technology. Whatever new technology came up in Germany, in South Korea, Shipping Corporation of India would immediately incorporate the technology as well. This was the case in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. But 1991, 1992 dealt a severe blow to the fortunes of this company because the Indian economy, which faced a serious crisis, it had to liberalize, privatize, and globalize the economy. New reforms were introduced, and we came under the obligation of WTO rules, the GATT rules, the General Agreement on Trade and Tariff. So, as part of the new global trade arrangement, India had to do away with the cabotage rules, opening up oil supplies to private companies and even foreign shipping companies. Until then, Shipping Corporation of India almost had a monopoly of sorts. It would even handle 27% of India's total EXIM trade. Our total export import, 27% of it was handled by the ships of Shipping Corporation of India. It also created a talent pool of merchant navy, navigators, engineers. A huge human resource pool had been created. They even went and joined foreign companies later, worked for foreign shipping firms, and they would send back remittances, which became crucial for the Indian economy. So, this organization had a huge contribution to the Indian economy and for India's strategic interests. But following the LPG era and the concept of most favored nation mandated by the WTO rules, India could no longer implement the cabotage rules. India could not retain the shipment of oil as the exclusive monopolistic domain of the Shipping Corporation of India. It had to throw open the sector for private participation and even foreign participation. And this has led to the decline of this company. The company was on the brink of collapse. Recently, the government was thinking of privatization of this company. In 2019, there was an internal document floated in the government to consider privatizing the Shipping Corporation of India as it had become a loss making entity. But today, the government is planning a major revival. The Shipping Corporation is likely to order 200 new merchant ships. It is likely to build up a new fleet of container ships, cargo vessels, and oil tanker fleets. Because, see, the COVID-19 pandemic was a big lesson for countries around the world. The pandemic led disruption to shipping and supply chains. It has highlighted the weakness of foreign dependency. Every country realized what will happen if you depend on others. They can easily cut off critical supplies that can cripple your economy. The lockdowns, the travel restrictions, it highlighted the weakness in depending on foreign controlled supply chains and foreign shipping. So since then, many countries are diversifying. They're looking at more indigenous and inward-looking policies. Like for example, in the US, the Biden administration and even the Trump administration, they have been investing in building up US capabilities in strategic areas like semiconductors, for example. The Trump administration has invested billions of dollars in some key industries which are strategic to US economy and US national security to reduce their dependency on China. So similarly, India has identified the shipping sector to be of strategic significance, not just of economic significance, but strategic significance, because this is tied to your national security eventually. You can't depend on foreign carriers, foreign vessels all the time. There is a need to have a fleet of Indian vessels, Indian flagged, Indian registered carriers, preferably government owned, which can deliver the national requirements, especially for critical resources and key resources like oil supplies and supply of key minerals. To protect this, India would need to revive its shipping industry. And that is why the SCI is being revived through joint ventures with other public sector units. India wants to become a major shipbuilding nation as well. This could benefit the shipyards in India. If Shipping Corporation of India is procuring 200 merchant ships with an entire fleet of oil tankers and container ships and cargo vessels, most of the orders will be given to domestic shipyards, which will create numerous jobs and livelihood opportunities as well. It will create indigenous technology. It will nurture the entire related industry that's connected to the world of shipping. And it can have a cascading effect, a positive cascading effect on the economy. So that is why the plan to revive the shipping corporation is of great importance, because India plans to emerge as a major shipping shipbuilder and a shipping country. Countries like China, look at the tonnage of China's shipping or companies and organizations. Look at the shipbuilding capabilities of, let's say, South Korea or even Greece or smaller countries as well. India is far behind. So that's why the SCI is being revived through joint ventures with the other concerned PSUs. Now, coming to the next topic, the Supreme Court, which took up the presidential reference, the 16th presidential reference under Article 143, related to the timeline for the governor to grant assent to a bill. The same Supreme Court bench, a five-judge constitution bench, has observed how the Constitution of India is becoming more swadeshi in its interpretation, in its working. See, the Constitution of India draws inspiration from different constitutions, from the British Constitution, from the Irish Constitution, from South Africa's Constitution, from the US, from Soviet Union. So from around the world, you see an inspiration that has led to some of the provisions in the Indian Constitution. But of course, they have been adapted to suit the Indian context. But if you look at the way cases were handled in the courts, be it constitutional matters or be it any civil or criminal case, usually the judges would cite foreign cases as a precedence. They would use foreign examples for bringing out judicial jurisprudence. For example, judges would often quote similar cases in US or similar cases in Britain. They would directly incorporate the jurisprudence seen in Western countries, in Western legal thought and constitutional thought into the Indian context. So this was a result of the colonial hangover of looking up to Western standards. But of late, there is a careful attempt by the Supreme Court, by the higher judiciary, to move away from this dependency on foreign ideas, on foreign jurisprudence. And there is a greater focus on Indianization of the Constitution and its interpretation and working. So, for example, in the presidential reference that was delivered, in the advice given to President Draupadi Murmu, the Constitution bench has deliberately avoided making even one reference to a foreign case. All the references used in this order, in the advice that has been given to the president, is based on Indian cases, Indian examples, Indian jurisprudence. So the article reminds us of the efforts of the Supreme Court and the higher judiciary to deliberately push for Indian jurisprudence and the Indian interpretation of the Constitution without relying upon foreign cases and foreign judgments of US Supreme Court or British Supreme Court and other countries. And instead, there is a calibrated attempt in the judiciary to focus on swadeshi values, swadeshi doctrines, and swadeshi principles. So, this reminds us of the efforts of several Chief Justices of India who have carefully put an effort to Indianize the Indian Constitution and its working. For example, retired Judge Abdul Nasir, when he delivered a historic speech regarding the colonial hangover on the working of the Indian Constitution, he referred to great Indian legal thinkers like Kautilya, Narad Muni, and Manu, Katyayana, Brihaspati, thinkers and mythological characters as well, pointing towards that historical knowledge, the cultural knowledge which can be imbibed into Indian jurisprudence. Then, if you look at important rulings of the Supreme Court in the Sabrimala temple entry case, in the case related to adultery, where adultery was decriminalized, in these cases, the Supreme Court has cited Manusmriti. So, the focus is on citing Indian references from the Indian context and to get rid of the colonial vestiges. So, this is what it refers to the Indianization of the working and the interpretation of the Indian Constitution. So we got to see that in the presidential reference, where the Supreme Court carefully avoided mentioning any foreign case or foreign judgment as a precedent. And instead, it has used only Indian cases, Indian judgments, and rulings to give that local touch, to add that Indianized flavor to the advice that was given to the President of India. So that is what the article is referring to. Now, coming to the next topic, the Department of Telecom has ordered the tech companies and messaging platforms to mandatorily implement SIM binding. So, what is this SIM binding? Now, you look at your messaging apps. Let's say we take WhatsApp, for example. On platforms like WhatsApp or even Telegram, Signal, when you sign up for the service, when you download the app and open your account, you can't do it without a SIM, right? You need a mobile number, you need to insert the SIM card. Only then the device will allow you to sign up and open your account on the device. But did you know there are methods to keep using the service even after you remove the SIM? Once you sign up, only for signing up, you need a mobile number. But once you sign up, you can remove the SIM and you can still continue using the service. Now, this, according to the government, is a security loophole because this has been misused by cyber fraudsters to commit cyber frauds. They use fraudulently acquired SIM cards to open accounts and sign up onto these services. Then they will remove the SIM cards to avoid being tracked. To ensure they are not traced or tracked, they remove the SIM cards and continue using these platforms and services to dupe the victims to commit cyber frauds. So that is why the Department of Telecom has issued a new set of guidelines that will make it mandatory for these companies to implement SIM binding, meaning the usage of this service will be bound to the existence of a SIM, an active SIM connection on that particular mobile device. Without a SIM card, you won't be able to use WhatsApp, Telegram, Signal, and other platforms, even e commerce platforms. That is the directive given by the government. But this is quite controversial. The directive also says that the web based version of WhatsApp should automatically log out after 6 hours of usage. Right now, those who are using the web based version on your desktops, you might have seen that once you log in, it remains logged in for a very long time. But now the government is directing WhatsApp and other similar companies to mandatorily log out the account after 6 hours of usage. So they have to log in again. So at each login, your IP details can be captured for tracing and identification, which can help in tracing cyber criminals. Now, the government says this is an essential measure to improve cybersecurity, to deal with cyber threats, but it raises a serious concern. See, under the cybersecurity laws, the government has notified the telecommunication identifier user entities in 2024. It has defined the concept of telecommunication identifier user entities. Now, this refers to all the companies, all the apps that are using mobile numbers to provide services via telecommunication networks. So, for example, all your food delivery apps, all your financial services apps, all your e commerce applications, your messaging platforms, your social media apps, they all ask for your mobile number, correct? So that they can create a unique account. When you're opening an account with any of these platforms, you're asked to give your mobile number to which a OTP is sent so they can verify the user and ensure that it's a unique and authentic user. Now, the government is saying that any such service where mobile number is being used by the company, they will have to follow this directive, which means that tomorrow, if you have to use these apps, your SIM should always be connected to the phone. So, without SIM card being present in the device, these services cannot be used. Even your food delivery apps will not work, your e commerce apps will not work if you don't have a SIM card. So, experts are saying that this has serious implications. It can disrupt many essential services. Experts are saying from the industry, the government has not it has not done a evaluation of the impact of these directives. It has not held consultation with industry leaders, and it is just pushing this directive, focusing on tracking and tracing the cybersecurity threats and the cyber fraudsters. But there are practical constraints in implementing it. Though technologically it's feasible, it requires simple code changes to do this. But when it comes to the delivery of the service, there can be major disruptions because of this. So there are concerns being flagged by the industry, but the government is very clear that SIM binding has to be mandatory. That any service where mobile numbers are being linked, it will be mandatory for the SIM card to be present on the device for you to use the service going forward. Coming to the prelim section, let's take a quick look. On page 11, there's an article that refers to the international treaty on plant genetic resources for food and agriculture. A very, very important treaty which is in the news. I'll explain what is this treaty, but first let's see why it is in news. Currently, the 11th session of the governing body of the treaty is taking place in Lima, in Peru. That's in South America. So, the 11th session of the governing body, GB11, just like you have COP30, Conference of Parties 30 for Climate Change Convention. Similarly, GB11 refers to 11th session of the governing body of International Treaty on Plant Genetic Resources for Food and Agriculture. So all the representative countries are meeting in Peru to discuss issues related to plant genetic resources and the sharing of plant genetic material. So what is this treaty? What is the background to it? This treaty was brought out by the Food and Agriculture Organization, which is part of the United Nations, in 2001, and it came into force in 2004. The main objective of the treaty is to provide for conservation of plant genetic resources, the seed varieties and the plant genetics, and provide for its sustainable sharing and usage. That's the idea behind the treaty, to ensure that plant genetic material is protected and its sustainable usage and sustainable trade of genetic material is encouraged. So, different varieties of seeds with different gene structures, they not only get protection under the treaty, but it enables the exchange of the plant material, the seed material, the genetic data to help in furthering research, to help in achieving food security by focusing on native food crops and agricultural variants. That is the purpose of this treaty. And under the treaty, there is a trading mechanism, the MLS, the multilateral system for access and benefit sharing. So, under the MLS, the multilateral system for access and benefit sharing, plant material and genetic seed material can be shared in a fair and equitable manner. Now, let's say a country has a endemic variety of plant species, a native variety of plant. So this can be traded. It can be procured by a developed country or a big agricultural corporation. So they can conduct research on it, come out with better variants, and improve agricultural productivity to ensure food security for the world. But when they are buying the plant material, the genetic material, and the seed variants, they have to pay a compensation to the ones who are selling that native plant variety and seed variant. This ensures fair and equitable access to genetic material, thus guarantees fairness between developed countries and developing nations. Right now, the negotiations which are taking place, it has raised a big concern. A group of scientists have written to the government of India, they have written a letter to the Union Minister for Agriculture asking for caution from the Indian side. Because it appears that the Indian delegation is agreeing to a very controversial proposal made by the developed countries. The developed countries of global north, they are pushing for amendments to the multilateral system on access and benefit sharing, which will allow Western big companies, big corporations, the big seed companies of the West, and the big agricultural giants of US and Europe and other developed nations to access the plant variants and the genetic material and seed variants from global south, from developing underdeveloped countries at very cheap and nominal rates without paying the commensurate amount. They will get hold of the plant material and genetic material from developing countries where most of the plant genetics is preserved, where most of the endemic native variants of plants and crops are present. So this has serious economic consequences for farmers, for indigenous communities. It has consequences for ecosystems, for the environment. And that is why a group of scientists in India are opposing India's position, because India appears to be giving to the pressure of Western countries and accepting a one sided deal, which might allow Western giant agricultural organizations and companies and biotech firms to get hold of Indian plant material and genetic material at a very cheap cost, which could be a big loss for Indian farmers. So, that is the reason why the scientists are appealing to the government to not agree to this compromise. So, please note down these details about the International Treaty on Plant Genetic Resources. There is a dedicated fund, the Benefit Sharing Fund, that enables the transaction of the plant genetic material. So please be aware of the provisions of this treaty as well. Next, on page 13, there's an article referring to Hansa 3 plane, which is indigenously designed and developed by the CSIR, the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research, and its aviation laboratory, the National Aerospace Laboratories, based out of Bengaluru. It has indigenously developed a trainer plane known as the Hansa. It's a lightweight two-seater plane mainly used for training pilots, for training commercial pilots. So NAL has now come out with the third variant, the third next generation variant, which is being commercially produced by an Indian company. The plan is to produce around 100 trainer aircraft, which can be used with the civil aviation industry to train thousands and thousands of pilots who are required in India's aviation industry in the coming years. India's civil aviation sector is growing at a rapid pace, at an exponential pace. Studies indicate we need around 30,000 pilots in the coming years, especially to improve air connectivity to smaller remote areas. So, there would be a need for enhancing pilot training to ensure more pilots can get commercial pilot licenses. This is where Hansa 3 next generation plugs the gap. An indigenous trainer plane without having to depend on foreign vendors and suppliers, which could meet the requirements of pilot training in the country. Along with this, the NAL is also developing a transport plane called the Saras. Saras is an indigenous light transport aircraft being developed for both military and civilian purposes. It'll be a 19-seater light transport aircraft, which can be inducted into armed forces and security forces as well for deploying troops, for transporting equipment, for logistics. It can be used for civilian purposes to improve air connectivity, especially for small leap flights between two nearby cities or to connect remote areas and tier 2, tier 3 towns. Planes like Saras could plug the gap to improve the civil aviation connectivity. So please be aware of these indigenous aircrafts being developed by the NAL. Coming to the next topic. Recently, there was a big scare in Bihar following the detection of uranium traces in breast milk. A study was published in the popular journal Nature, and the study pointed towards slightly higher levels of uranium concentration in breast milk that was sampled from lactating mothers across different villages in different parts of Bihar. So, this study showed significant concentration of uranium 238. And this triggered a big alarm, a big scare that whether lactating mothers should feed their infants with breast milk or not. Because, see, uranium is naturally occurring, uranium 238 especially, it's naturally occurring in the soil and the rocks that are present. But, however, naturally occurring uranium in limited traces does not pose a much of a direct threat because it's not radioactive. When you're exposed to it, your skin can easily block the alpha particles. So let's say you just have an outer external exposure to naturally occurring uranium. In limited concentration, it's absolutely fine. In fact, studies have shown that on a regular basis, humans are exposed to radiation from uranium. But the alpha particles can be blocked by our skin. But when you ingest natural uranium into your body through contaminated food, through contaminated water, that is when it can become dangerous in higher concentration. According to WHO standards, the maximum limit for uranium in breast milk is 30 micrograms per liter. Any concentration of uranium beyond this limit could become quite dangerous for the infants. It could affect the development of their kidney, liver, and lungs. It could lead to cognitive developmental issues. It could have a mental health outcome. It will affect the IQ of the child, and it could even cause cancer if there is regular ingestion of uranium contaminated breast milk. But however, fortunately in Bihar, the concentration levels are very low. The study has shown the concentration is hardly around 5 micrograms per liter. The WHO limit is 30 micrograms per liter. So it's many times lower than the danger limit. So the experts are saying it's absolutely fine. But there should be caution because this contamination of uranium is happening through groundwater contamination. In several states of India, there is contamination of groundwater table by the uranium which leaches into the groundwater table in states like Bihar, in Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, West Bengal, in Andhra Pradesh, Telangana as well, Rajasthan as well. There are many places, many districts, villages where higher levels of natural uranium is found. It's a very heavy metal which can leach into the soil system, into the water, and when ingested through food and water, it can become quite deadly and dangerous. It can cause cancer, it can affect internal organs, the kidney, liver, even the development of lungs and spleen. It could lead to cognitive issues and it could become generational as well, which can be passed down through multi generations. So that is where the caution has to be exercised. So the exploitation of groundwater table, the contamination of our groundwater, the over dependency on groundwater, the lack of testing, the lack of awareness is what is leading to this problem. But regular testing should take care of this fear because there shouldn't be unnecessary fear mongering. Because pregnant women and lactating women in Bihar, they got alarmed by hearing these news reports. They even stopped breastfeeding their infants. Now, this is equally dangerous because, as you know, breastfeeding is absolutely essential to improve the immunity of the child, to facilitate better physical, mental growth and development, to bring down infant mortality rate. WHO recommends focus on breastfeeding. So, because of the fear that was caused by the reports of uranium traces in breast milk, Many women, out of fear, stopped feeding breast milk to their infants. So this is where clarifications have been issued by the authorities. Awareness is being spread that it is fine, it is okay, it's not in dangerous limits. But there should be a close watch on the contamination of the groundwater table with uranium. So that is what we learn from this article. Coming to the last topic, society related topic. On the supplement page, the Hindu mentions a very unique, distinct community, the Kaithi Lambadas or Lambadas, found in today's Telangana. Historically, this community belonged to the Mathura region of Uttar Pradesh. And several centuries ago, due to communal violence in the region, they migrated towards southern India and they have settled in today's Telangana. But the Kaithi Lambada community is very different from the other Lambadas or Lambada communities found in different parts of the country. Now, from Rajasthan to Madhya Pradesh to Karnataka, you find different sects of or different factions of the Lambada community. But Kaithi Lambada community is more unique. It's quite different. See, traditionally they were a cattle grazing community. They would take the cattle as herders into forests, and as you know, in the wild, they would face threats from wild animals. So, to deter the wild animals, the predators, to keep them away, to scare them, the Kaithi Lambadas developed a very unique way of dressing and wearing ornaments and hairstyle in order to intimidate the wild animals. You might have seen members of the community, they wear very bright, colorful, large ornaments, be it the neck piece they wear, the anklets they wear on their leg, or the earrings that they wear, the bangles. It is all big in size, designed to intimidate. Even on their clothes, it's very bright in color. They use a lot of mirrors to cause the reflection of the light in order to intimidate wild animals. And they even have this unique hairstyle that almost looks like an inverted knife. The men and women of the community, they drape the hair in such a way that it almost looks like a protruding weapon in order to intimidate the predators. So these are some unique features that you find in the Kaithi Lambada community. So please note down the features of this unique community, and that is relevant for your prelims exam. So on this note, I bring my discussion to an end. I hope you guys have understood all the key topics. And if you like the session, do press the like button, and we'll catch up in the next session tomorrow. Thanks for watching.